So, how's my best friend doing today?
I'm fine, bestest buddy.
There's a lot of books and films that show the experience of middle school through the eyes of a child, and all the confusion, challenges, and changes that come with it. As much as I love media like the Diary of a Wimpy Kid series and Bo Burnham's film 8th Grade, one TV show stands out to me as one of the most entertaining, but also one of the most educational products that covers this ground. The mid-2000s Nickelodeon live-action series, Ned's Declassified School Survival Guide. This 3-season episodic comedy revolved around everyman Ned Bigby and his best friends, the neurotic computer geek Cookie and the tough but stubborn Mose, as their day-to-day adventures at James K. Polk Middle School pit them against bullies, insane teachers, and gross school lunches. With witty, fast-paced dialogue, slapstick, and a grade's worth of memorable side characters, Ned's Declassified was pretty much a live-action cartoon. It was created by the man behind one of the most influential cartoons of the 2000s, Johnny Test, and in some places, the influence certainly shows. Each 11-minute episode focused on the main trio dealing with a select school topic in different ways, with actual advice being given along the way. A lot of the tips were simple or sometimes a little too specific, but they were a great incentive to watch the show, and worked with the comedy and messages very well. This series had so many noteworthy episodes, so I've decided to format this review through a top 10 list, discussing the episodes with the best tips, stories, and comedy. Without further ado, this is my top 10 Ned's Declassified episodes.
Nick Tando.
Don't you dare start without me.
Wait, Cosmo, is that you? The same Cosmo famous for such classics as the SpongeBob Worst the Best series and talking about obscure Canadian cartoons? I didn't know you liked this really specific show no one really talks about.
That's me. One thing you might not know about me is that I'm actually a huge fan of this Nickelodeon sitcom in particular. I think it's one of the best examples of how to do what is essentially a live-action cartoon the right way. Unlike some other, well, mistakes in the past. And honestly, I'm impressed. I mean, this is a show that had an episode literally crossing over with Cosmo and Wanda themselves, and yet you didn't do an obvious pun with my name. That's rare.
No problem, but you could say that I Cosmo ignored you?
Ah, frick, Nick. That's barely a pun. But since I'm here already, why don't we talk about our collective top 10 episodes of the show off the top of our heads with no additional planning involved whatsoever. You can call it Nick's Declassified, Ned's Declassified School Survival Guide.
That's a terrible name.
No, trust me on this one, okay? I already made a logo for it.
The Season 2 episode School Websites deals with an important issue almost every kid that grew up in the 2000s had to face eventually, having an awful school webpage. But when Cookie and Ned get the chance to redesign James K. Polk's old one, they are met with the even bigger problem of not being able to access the site anymore, as basketball-obsessed pretty boy Seth accidentally changed the password. And so they need to find a way to reconnect to the main server by the end of the period before everyone sees Moses' embarrassing pop-up ads they installed on the site, and Sweeney gives them detention for abusing the school's surveillance system by having strapped a camera onto the weasel and him not being able to access his credit scores anymore. And though it may sound like a lot is going on in this episode at once, the plot is one of the most straightforward the show has to offer, with Cookie's and Ned's problem being pretty much the same, as they both try to get the website back to running smoothly again. Mose is more focused on getting people excited for the volleyball tournament she's trying to set up, but more or less has the same end goal as well, because she needs the website to do so. What is less straightforward about it is some of the characters in it, which are ones we don't get to see very often, including Scoop the newspaper kid and the dungeon master himself, Mr. Quest. The two of them are both good characters with passable acting skills for the most part that, just like everything else in the show, are so over the top that you can't help but smile at how ridiculous they portray the cliches they are based on. Additionally, we see Gordy more closely entwined with the plot than ever, as him trying to stop the weasel this time is actually related to the conclusion to this episode, which plays out like any cheap end of the world movie ever, with the timer stopping mere seconds before Sweeney is about to give them detention for life. Along with the portrayal of the World Wide Web that was terribly dated even back then, and perfectly ridiculous Photoshop on the assets they ended up using, this was a solid episode that only could have been improved upon by us actually getting to see what the teacher's lounge looks like, but unfortunately that hasn't happened to this day.
Oh yeah, okay, it's cool.
There's not a whole lot in Ned's Declassified that I would call dated. Outside of some of the fashion and the episodes about cell phones where everyone uses flip phones from 2005, all the tips and comedy hold up. And despite the technology and its references having aged a lot, the Season 2 episode Video Projects was and still is great. When the whole grade is assigned video projects, Ned and Cookie are allowed to do whatever, but can't decide whether to make a ninja movie or a space movie, and end up sabotaging and getting in each other's way in the process. They do a lot of different gags with this premise, like having the cast involved with overblown physical stunts, and Cookie completely screwing Ned over through the magic of video editing. Meanwhile, Mose is assigned to interview a teacher, and decides to focus her project around her history teacher, Mr. Wright. Mose's subplot is simple fun, as Mr. Wright uses the project as an excuse to make himself seem cooler to his class, and the ways he does so are pretty entertaining. The real meat of the episode comes when footage of fast-talking geek Martin Quirley swinging a broom around the AV room gets out, and he soon becomes the laughingstock of the school. This is an obvious riff on the ancient Star Wars Kid internet meme, which was parodied in many other TV shows around this time. The use of such an outdated piece of culture should be a sign of disaster, but this reference is used to give the episode a compelling and heartwarming ending. Ned and Cookie's sabotage against their own project leaves them with only a special effects tape to show for all their work, but they decide to overlay the Martin footage on top of it, turning Martin into an action hero now revered by his fellow classmates. Video Projects is not only a well-written and relatable episode with a lot of variety in characters and humor, but also one of the few episodes of the show to have a truly heartwarming ending. Who knew dead memes could achieve such great emotional moments when used correctly?
Season 2's tips for procrastination are some of the most helpful the show has to offer, and the episode that goes along with it portrays why they are so important very well, by showing Ned having to prepare for a big presentation that is due in 3 weeks by the beginning of the episode, but in mere 3 days just moments later. Even with Mose constantly reminding him of the fact that he will need to work on the ethnicity project they are tasked with, he is more focused on building paper football robots, balancing spoons on his head, and building a miniature ninja out of popsicle sticks, which, in all fairness, is far more impressive than the episode may lead you to believe. It does a very good job, however, at showing how easily distracted most kids at Ned's age can be, and balances it out with him only slowly coming to the realization that he will need to get help eventually to overcome his procrastination tendencies. And unlike the one SpongeBob SquarePants episode with basically the same premise, this one gets resolved with him being able to finish his task in time and yet also learning from the experience, while Mose, who was constantly nagging him in the beginning, ends up being too caught up in being sure of a victory against him. So we not only get a lesson from Mr. Wright about how you should divide the big task ahead of you into smaller, more manageable chunks, but it also shows how easily caught up you can get in being sure of your eventual success that you forget to put in the effort yourself. But if all that pesky learning and smart writing is a bit too much for you, we also have Cookie's side plot to balance it out for you, which shows him being tricked by Lisa Zemo into spending time with her and is sure to not leave you with any lasting impact whatsoever. The eventual conclusion, as deserving towards Mose as it may be, also came off as a bit too random for my liking, but both aren't enough to drag down what, all things considered, is an entertaining episode that is improved upon even more by the show's single best original song and a cool montage of Ned recreating only the finest Japanese stereotypes. It also turns Gordy into even more of a sympathetic figure, as he is not able to leave Ned by himself trapped in his room for mere seconds and has to immediately storm in to help him. It's an episode that helped me better my time management, and with Mr. Wright's 12-volume guide to 12 volume guides, is also one that's filled with many memorable moments that more than justify its weaker side plot.
One minor problem that frequently pops up throughout this series is that some episodes with great ideas get overshadowed by weak subplots that are too simple, or everything is wrapped up too quickly. This is bound to happen when you have a show that tries to tell 2 or 3 stories within 11 minutes. But when the pacing works, it can be so seamless that you barely notice how well constructed some episodes are. Lost and Found is a great example of this, as it may not seem like an extraordinarily great episode at first, but it's got so many moving pieces and different ideas that work together way better than they have any right to be. While searching through the school's Lost and Found, Ned finds a pair of basketball sneakers signed by Anthony Carmelo, a basketball star that was probably relevant in 2006. He has to wait until the end of the school day if he wants to claim them, but Mose is bent on finding the owner of the shoes in order to avenge the memory of Puppy Bear, a stuffed animal she lost in 6th grade. Elsewhere, Cookie searches for his MP3 player in order to keep the school from hearing an embarrassing song he recorded.
Tell me it wasn't Cowboy Cookie.
Cowboy Cookie, the ladies really love him. Cowboy Cookie, the best you ever saw. Cowboy Cookie, the bullies they don't care. Cowboy Cookie, yippee yippee.
Seeing Ned Ned and Mose at odds with each other was a conflict that the show rarely had, and it's used here to great effect. Ned does everything in his power to keep the owner of the shoes from being found, including trying to pass off a fake version of Mose's puppy bear as the original, and locking both of them in the small room in the school that locks on the inside. This is an actual room that was established in a previous episode, and I have no clue why it was built there. I also have no idea why it has a secret passageway that leads to a secret room to the vice principal's office, where he stores all the lost items formerly from the Lost and Found. This plot point may seem like it came out of nowhere, but the episode does a great job escalating the silliness of its story to the point where this room with an almost Scooby-Doo-like entrance in this regular middle school doesn't seem too out of the ordinary. After all, we've already seen Ned get a package delivered to him mere seconds after he orders it online, something Amazon Prime can't even do, so why not? That's what makes Lost and Found so great. It gets so wrapped up in the Ned's Declassified world that even some of the strangest things the show had don't even seem too odd. Also, the Grammys totally missed out on nominating Cowboy Cookie. What an underrated jam.
You can tell that Computer Lab also shows the characters still in early phases of adapting to their roles, and more noticeably, the tips being much broader than they would eventually become, with this one literally focusing on one specific room in school. And as such, we are introduced to many aspects of any Computer Lab in all its stated early 2000s glory. As Luma and the other school bullies destroys a pair of printer pens, Cookie is not able to make a copy of Moses' math assignment, which forces them to go to the Computer Lab, where Ned would also have to start working on his project. There we see the return of a familiar face with Mr. Quest, who doesn't allow Cookie and Mose to enter the lab, but when they try to enter by force, the three of them get kicked out altogether. One aspect of the first season that has gotten progressively less as the show went on was Cookie's total dependency on technology. It showed him as less of a total geek and more of a mixture of cyborg and human, which is still in full swing here, but would get toned down with the next season. Okay, that one doesn't count. And so the best aspects of this episode come from Cookie, with the help of Lisa, needing to relive his life all over again, this time without technology there to aid him. Though this is a minor subplot to the main event of Ned and Mose needing to find a way to get into the computer lab, it shows a great deal of compassion from Lisa towards Cookie that very early on hints at their future relationship. What drags this episode down just a little is that there really isn't anything to take away in terms of actual tips to be learned, and just like many other season 1 episodes, has a relatively weak plot, but rather focuses on its comedy, which to be fair is also its best aspect. Cookie not even being able to eat corn properly, along with Mr. Quest's actor cracking up any time he needs to deliver a line, and Ed and Mose then disguising themselves as Coconut Head and Lisa make this one of the funniest episodes of the show, which isn't even mentioning Mr. Right ending up playing the same game as Nell was talking about in the beginning, and then disguising himself as Coconut Head to get in as well. Fun fact, Coconut Head's actor actually once said in an interview that while he was filming for the show, he would get recognized on the school set quite often, but as soon as he'd take off the wig, people would pay no attention to him, and I would like to imagine that that is what made him decide to never take off the wig again in order to stay relevant. Never mind.
Season 3 of Ned's Declassified is my personal favorite of the three. Not only did it have a pretty competent and well-structured romantic arc, which we'll talk about more in a bit, but the creators got very ambitious when it came to episode concepts, leading to some episodes that didn't even take place at the school, like parties and the 5th entry on this list, the bus. After Ned remembers that he accidentally placed a poorly thought out love note in the locker of his love interest Susie, Ned has to motivate Mr. Quest, who's the bus driver here, to drive as quickly as he can so he can get to school before Susie does. Mr. Quest's driving not only causes issues for Mose, who has difficulties trying to grab a seat next to her love interest Feynman, but Mr. Quest also drives past Cookie's bus stop, and he has to race to school with the help of his math teacher, Dr. Xavier, not wanting to destroy his perfect attendance. This episode has a domino effect to the way it's structured, and it helps connect the different plots that are all happening at once. Even with the small moments, like when Cookie drops a vase at a yard sale he stopped at, it gives the bus a flat tire that acts as the final obstacle on Ned's journey. Every piece of the episode affects another, and it helps to drive the stakes up as time begins to run out. The bus is also a great little spotlight for some of the show's supporting cast, since it's an excuse for tons of characters to be together within one confined space. Students like Seth and Martin Quirley get in Mose's way, and Coconut Head learns what it's like to truly suffer loss. Mr. Mr. Quest and Xavier are both given the spotlight here, and even though they aren't the most fleshed out or entertaining of the teachers, I enjoy how they play off both Ned and Cookie respectively. Mose is on her own and trying to snag the empty seat next to Feynman, but there's still plenty of great moments to be found with the tactics she tries to use. This episode is probably the most refreshing for its setting. 90% of it takes place outside of the school, along the sunny streets of a California neighborhood. It's just great to see the more physical gags that they can do in the wide open spaces. The bus is not the most unique episode of anything I've ever seen. Like another Nickelodeon show had a bus driver character go through the same subplot as Mr. Quest did in their bus episode, but the format allows it to do so much more than other episodes of the series could in both comedy and plot development, making it a ride you shouldn't miss.
Unlike all the other episodes of Ned's Declassified apart from the finale, its Halloween special is not actually split into two separate segments, but is one big episode that is split at some point at the supposed ending of its first one. This may sound a little confusing at first, but makes a lot of sense when you see its official ending, where it is revealed that Nell is only dreaming of the events of the Guide to Vampires, Ghouls, Werewolves, and Zombies. This is also the reason for that episode being one of the most creative the show had ever had, with all the school's students and teachers being transformed into monsters of all kinds, including Ned and Krabs as vampires, Cookie as a werewolf, Gordy as a zombie, and Mose as the unfriendly ghost. In the episode itself, Ned needs to try and pass his flying test, which despite his best efforts, he is not able to pull off, while Cookie is being followed around by Loomer and Mose is looking for a friend. She does so by attempting to kill off multiple of the show's secondary characters, making this episode somewhat similar to The Simpsons' annual Trios of Horror episodes. All this is taking place after Ned fell asleep from eating too much candy at the school's Halloween party, which the gang had some trouble setting up, as they believed to have accidentally killed the school's principal pal, which in the end turns out to have been his plan all along to prove to them that even at his age he is still able to scare them. Interestingly enough, in setting up their party, the three of them also get help from Gordy and Krabs, which we haven't seen working together prior to this episode. We get a nice montage of them trying to work together in crafting a sign for the party, and probably the best costumes and props in the show so far. And all it took was the school's entire art budget, with moments like Ned mooning Cookie for him to be able to turn into a werewolf without a full moon, Gordy constantly losing his limbs and them using Pal's limp dead hand to wave at a disgruntled Sweeney. This is one of the funniest episodes in the show, and while it isn't necessarily trying to be creepy at any point, it still does a great job at capturing the essence of a cheap middle school Halloween party. It makes you wonder what other holiday related episodes of the show would have looked like, such as a Christmas special with them needing to come up with tips to overcome the cold, or a St. Patrick's Day episode, which would be perfect for an eventual reboot with them in high school.
One thing that Ned's Declassified improved upon over the course of its run was the pacing of its episodes, and the episode Dismissal pretty much only exists to show that feature off. The episode is set during the time after the end of a school day, but before the buses leave, one that was very stressful for me during my earliest middle school days. For a while, my bus was the first one to leave, and if I wanted to be able to catch it on time after taking a visit to my locker, I had to move as fast as I could. This episode encapsulates that feeling of having a clock constantly over your head by literally putting that clock on screen. The stakes in this episode feel higher than they've ever been, as you're constantly reminded of them, but it never really feels like it's being shoved in your face. It's a simple gimmick, but quite an effective one, as it really shows how tightly written and edited the show is.
Bus leaves in 2 minutes!
The gimmick helps play into a trio of solid stories. Cookie has to go back to his locker to grab his science textbook while trying to escape his angry rival Evelyn. Ned tries to find everything he needs for the end of the day after Susie unexpectedly moves into his locker, and Mose stages a rebellion when she gets impatient over the line to the girls' restroom compared to the boys. These last-minute obstacles take the characters all over the school, and there is a pretty decent sense that all this probably could happen within 10 minutes or so. This episode is a bit standard as far as Ned's Declassified episodes go, but it's the little things that put it above so many others. I like how Mose gets inspiration for her disguise from an ad for the school play, which is the topic of Dismissal's sister episode, and how quickly Cookie's able to recognize Mose under her disguise. A nice little character moment.
Mose?
Again, it really is that little timer that drives the episode, making a silly selection of stories into a relatable journey with high stakes. When it comes down to the last minute of the episode, I'm always on the edge of my seat. It's just incredible how much one little gimmick can bring out the best in an episode.
Like I said during my segment on the show's Halloween special, the show usually consisted of regular 11-minute parts. But as is common for many Nickelodeon shows, the series ended off with a 40-minute long special titled Field Trips, Permission Slips, Signs and Weasels. That, you guessed it, has the entire Poke school going on a field trip. This means that for the first time ever, we see almost every single recurring character in the show appear together in one place. And as you would expect from a series finale like that, it also pays homage to many episodes past. This includes a recap of Moe's and Ned's relationship, Gordy having a final face-off with the Weasel, and even a paint compilation instead of the usual bloopers. This doesn't mean that the episode is only relying on old running gags though. The show adapts surprisingly well to the new double-length format and has various new and fun characters sprinkled into its 3 storylines that intertwine with each other very well and give closure to a main character's middle school arc. Cookie's new persona as the Steel Eagle is a great spoof of superhero tropes. Seeing the utter destruction of the school is unexpected yet fun, and at no point did I feel like there was too much time spent on any of the characters, though the most focus was clearly put on Ned deciding whether he should go out with Susie or Mose. And while that may have been a little too cheesy at times and the episode was a little lighter on the joke department, it also saw characters like Luma going a complete 180 and even Krupp seeming somewhat content with the gang for the first time ever. It's the perfect mixture of the familiar and the unfamiliar.
Watching Field Trips, Permission Slips, Signs and Weasels always manages to leave me feeling a little emotional. After watching these characters and actors grow up for the past 54 episodes, it's hard to see their middle school adventures come to an end. Part of me always feels a tiny bit dissatisfied from it. The episode ends on a note that feels like it opens the door for more stories, rather than completely shutting that door for the last time. Like in some ways it's more of a season finale than a series finale. Maybe this was intentional, given how a high school survival guide spinoff was in development, but it just seems like so much more could be done now that Cookie and Lisa have a chance to connect again, and Ned and Mose are officially a couple. We didn't even see the characters do anything with the guide the whole series revolves around. Honestly, I can look past most of that stuff, because while I would have written the episode differently, I still think the show went out on a high note. Even if the bulk of the episode is the characters running around Huffington Gardens, the Art Thieves subplot is a little too weird, even for this show, and the romantic climax of the series is literally an AMV montage, the episode is still a joy to watch. It uses its extended runtime and refreshingly open setting to have some great set pieces, especially this one beautiful shot with Ned lying among some dandelions. I also find it really funny that they decided to completely destroy the school for the finale, like it's a weirdly violent way of telling the viewers that the show is over, and there's no going back. In addition to all of this, they do a good job selling Ned and Mose as a couple here too. It's been a great payoff to a story they've been hinting at throughout most of Season 3, as they show that the two truly deserve each other just because of how much they've been through together. And the final moments that each of the characters have all work, especially the one between Ned and Mr. Sweeney. This might be my favorite interaction in the whole series just because of how satisfying it is.
You'll be remembered as one of my worst students. And also one of my favorites. Good luck.
What? Aren't you gonna help me down?
No.
Picking my 10 favorite Ned's Declassified episodes and also ranking them on top of that was somewhat similar to picking my favorite kids. And since Nick and I worked on this list together, some episodes were bound to not make the cut. Some of them barely didn't make it onto the list, and some we just didn't happen to fully agree on, but now we want to each talk about some of our honorable mentions. Some of the visuals in this one can become a little trippy and even gross, but to have BMX legend Matt Hoffman appear out of nowhere is a genius touch. That, along with Ned's equally legendary hamster ball, makes this a very iconic episode.
Ned becomes the Revenger, a hero with his own theme music that is bent on seeking revenge against others, and looks like he stepped straight out of the Matrix. It's too bad that the rest of the episode isn't as fun or memorable as the main storyline.
This episode has more references in it than almost any other one in the series, and though that might get distracting to some, it makes the usually very simple concept of dodgeball intense to the point of it seeming like a full-on war. Also, Durga's motivational volleyball video is one of the show's funniest moments.
This is probably my favorite half hour of the show, as both segments work on their own, but are very excellent showcases for many different members of the supporting cast. Also, it marks the first appearance of Simone, who is just Cookie dressed in drag. It's as great as you think it would be.
See ya.
If you remember one episode of the show, it's probably Daydreaming. One that wasn't just the most consistently creative and unique, but also one that offered an important and positive piece of advice I've never heard in a piece of media or anywhere else. When Mr. Sweeney's class spends the entire period daydreaming, the science teacher gives his students a riddle that they must figure out before they're allowed to leave for lunch. As Ned tries to help his fellow classmates out, his mind throws him into an action-packed adventure, where he rides around with his friends in a cool spy car, takes out deadly ninjas of death, and gets some extra help from the Fairly Odd Parents. No matter what you might think of the show now, this cameo is honestly pretty great, but it would have been even better if it wasn't spoiled in every single description for this episode that I've seen. What did you think about the cameo, Timmy?
Ned is going to pay for stealing my fairies. As soon as that dismissal bell rings, he's going to wish that he could survive what I'm going to do to him.
Yeah, I thought it was pretty strange too. Ned's daydreams bring some of the weirdest visuals to a show that had very few of them otherwise, like Mr. Sweeney dangling a pizza in front of his class, or auditioning to be in the next Spider-Man reboot. But these daydreams are more than just a distraction. Ned actually uses them to figure out Sweeney's challenge, and he ends up being the hero to his class he dreamed he would be. The whole episode shows the benefits of daydreaming in action, proving that it isn't just a distraction, but a mental process that can be great for problem solving at times.
How did you manage to figure out the puzzle?
When you trapped me in your evil web powers, it all became clear.
Oh, right. Well done.
This is the perfect kind of message for a show like Ned's Declassified to spread. The entire series was always focused on giving advice about the little things, the kind of stuff that will only matter to you during this time in your life. It never sugarcoated anything, and gave kids a chance to laugh at the kind of things they struggled with after class. And it did so with a sense of humor and a cast of characters that made surviving middle school a little easier and a little more fun.
I, for one, had a great time watching the show when I was in middle school. It was a perfect companion to grow up with. And honestly, I think I can speak for everyone when I say that a continuation with them in high school or maybe college would have been sure to be an all-time favorite of mine.
Well, a couple of years ago, the show did actually manage to get some kind of follow-up from the same creator. But it was in the form of a series that was advertised like this.
Wasabo chips turn the teachers against you.
You fell right into a trap.
Just grab the bag.
No. No. No!
Go, cookie.